Y'all ready to do a little psychoanalysis? Forgive me for that. That was super corny. Anyway, today we're going to be diagnosing the conundrum that is Patrick Bateman, the main character in American Psycho. American Psycho is both a book and a movie, and today we're going to talk a little bit about both. I'm Micah, licensed therapist, and here we like to talk about horror and mental health. Psychopathy, aka ASPD or antisocial personality disorder, is clearly present in Mr. Bateman, but it's not quite that simple. Finally finished the audiobook. Here's a little confession. I've had a physical copy of this book for a very long time. I have tried to read it about 3 or 4 times, and my ADHD brain is like, nah, I can't maintain focus because of Mr. Bateman's droning on and on in the beginning about things that I don't understand. He goes into painful detail about everything. It is so slow in the beginning. But it serves a purpose, I think. Anyway, I did finally manage to finish it with the help of an audiobook. This is not a plug for Audible, but I will take money. For anyone not familiar with the story, Patrick Bateman is a particular and self-absorbed young man living in New York City in the 1980s. He is working on Wall Street, so he has a lot of money. He's super detail-oriented and has some special interests, which include clothing, music, and showing off how much money he has. He's extra as fuck and tends to adhere to a strict routine when his functioning is optimal. Mr. Bateman also likes to drink and do cocaine, which can definitely exacerbate the mental health issues he's got going on. The twist about Mr. Bateman is that he lives a separate life as a serial killer. He is a murderer, maybe. We'll come back to that. So I do want to briefly look at some of the key differences between the book and the movie. Then we'll jump into my assessment of Patrick. Okay, so I first watched the movie years ago. Loved it. Finally finished the book, as I said. Felt like the longest thing I've ever listened to. I was committed, even though sometimes it felt like a horrible business meeting that could have been an email. There were times where I wanted to poke my own eyeballs out rather than listen to Patrick Bateman drone on and on about like Versace. I don't even know expensive clothing brands, so I don't even know what the hell he's talking about most of the time. But the detail and the things that he gives really gives you a glimpse into the way that his mind works. So I think it's important. You just have to have some patience for it if you're looking at the book. Ultimately, the movie does a good job at capturing the story. They didn't deviate very far from the plot. It's just very condensed and very tamed down, as you would expect if you were familiar with the book. Then you know that this happened for a reason. It's gotta appeal to the mainstream public, you know, Hollywood stuff. Side note, chainsaw scene in the movie, not a chainsaw scene in the book. But besides that, it's quite similar. That's the one thing that got jazzed up a little bit in the movie. I guess that was their way of trying to glimpse at the brutality of the story. Yeah, because that scene is like absolutely nothing compared to what happens in the book. No one would watch this movie. Well, not no one. I would watch this movie. Lots of people would watch this movie, but the movie would not have made as much money, and it would have been way more controversial if they had included the brutality of those scenes. Like, it wouldn't have gone very far at all. It would be like some underground thing that weirdos like me would be talking about because we watched it on fedupmovies.com. Bateman is a Wall Street bro who really likes to kill women and homeless people, and a work rival of sorts at one point. If you like Patrick in the movie, I challenge you to get to know Patrick in the book. Then tell me how you feel. He's an unpleasant person for more reasons than just the potential murder, even more than just the narcissism. If you are sensitive to graphic descriptions of sexual encounters intermingled with even more graphic descriptions of violence, it's probably not for you. It rapidly switches between the two topics too, so your brain's like, you may just want to take my word for it. The violence which happens, if I haven't said this enough, is quite intense. Lots of torture, mutilation, cannibalism. I can't remember, but there may be a little necrophilia sprinkled in there, because why not? Now on to Patrick. Any good assessment starts with historical information collection. In the book, you get little sprinkles of background information, but not a whole lot. He comes from privilege. He has a brother. He went to Harvard Business School, which he won't let you forget. He has a mother living in some kind of assisted living type facility. It's only very briefly mentioned when he visits her at some point in the book. His job may exist because of his family. You know, the standard rich white boy BS. There are some brief mentions of late adolescence and his time in college that definitely indicate some potential conduct disorder. In case you're new here, conduct disorder is like ASPD light. It is what happens before someone develops antisocial personality disorder. Because we don't have full information about his history. We're just going to work with what we have. In the book, you really don't like Patrick, or you shouldn't. He's racist, homophobic, and misogynistic. But if that for some reason isn't enough for you, he also kills animals. Mostly dogs. We see a glimpse of that in the movie when he murders a homeless man, and it's implied that he breaks the legs of the dog that was with the homeless man, but we don't really see that. In the book, we get graphic description of that scene plus others. Everybody in his world are wealthy business people. There's this culture of just cheating on your partner with whoever, hanging out with the bros at expensive restaurants, and just talking shit about everyone. They are frat bros turned Wall Street bros who really like to eat expensive food. Patrick is very focused on planning these trips to restaurants and the social interaction. And as you could guess, it gets a little excessive and a little obsessive. But that's Patrick. What exactly is going on with him? All right, so I've said it, I'll say it again. So any of these disorders that I'm talking about, I'm not saying that murder is a component of that. So I'm going to talk about some of the diagnoses I can see being present and compare it to the DSM criteria. Doesn't mean I'm right. I may have a little bit of experience in this area. But if you want to argue, that's fine. You can do that on your own in the comments. All right, so first, autism. Hear me out. One reason I struggled to read this story multiple times, like 10 plus years ago, is because he has some rambling moments about things I do not give a crap about. Clothes, 80s music. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love me some 80s music. But I don't care about the details of every single Whitney Houston album and all of the impact it made on culture. Not my thing. This, in particular, reminds me of special interest that you would see with someone who is on the autism spectrum. The painful amount of detail associated with this special interest is what made me think it seems a little bit like autism. But to reiterate, not the murder part. He speaks of his mask of sanity and discusses the feeling of it slipping away. So neurodivergent people are prone to masking or concealing some of their neurodivergent quirks and think it better fit in with the social expectations around them from neurotypical people. That was another key sign there that maybe Patrick recognizes there's something different about him. But to be fair, there's definitely a history of violent people, predators, and serial killers living two separate lives and theoretically masking their true intention and their true nature. That Patrick freaks out when things don't go to plan and he excessively plans things. Sometimes people with autism don't do well with transitions and they want to try to anticipate or plan what's going to happen next. We see that a lot in anxiety disorders though. On to OCD. Many people on the internet believe that Patrick appears to have OCD, which I can totally see why you would think that. I don't think we have enough evidence for that. So OCD usually presents as a pattern of intrusive obsessions followed by a compulsion that alleviates the anxiety associated with the obsession. And I just don't see enough of this specific ritual to believe that that's what's going on with him. He has some traits, but he doesn't seem distressed by the obsession, and that's a key part of OCD. He seems excited about it. That's not your average OCD presentation. That just doesn't all line up, right? So he is obsessive about multiple things. His appearance, clothing, food, the appearance of others, what they are wearing in painful detail. This strikes me as more obsessive due to his overt narcissism. He's constantly comparing himself to others in a weird way and critiquing everyone around him thoroughly, especially women. He may have some criteria that may align more with OCPD or obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is different than OCD. It's a pervasive pattern of behavior that is centered around perfectionism, and it tends to result in highly critical opinions of others. Sounds like the Bateman I spent 16 plus hours of my life hearing about. Let's look at OCPD. It's not very common. It's not something that a lot of people are familiar with. Okay, so we have preoccupation with details, rules, lists, order, and organization to the extent that it interferes with task completion. We have perfectionism that is inflexible and interferes with task completion. Excessive devotion to work and productivity to the exclusion of other activities and social relationships. Rigidity and stubbornness about matters of morality, ethics, or values. A preoccupation with orderliness and cleanliness. Avoidance of interpersonal situations that involve risk of criticism or embarrassment. Unrealistic standards for self and others, leading to feelings of inadequacy. And the pattern is not better explained by another mental health disorder such as obsessive compulsive disorder and anxiety disorder or autism spectrum disorder. So ultimately, I don't think he meets full criteria for OCPD. I think he's got some traits, and I think that may be coming from some of the other personality disorders that are more likely to be present. Let's talk about ASPD again. So ASPD is characterized by a pervasive and enduring pattern of disregarding the rights of individuals, and it typically emerges in childhood or early adolescence. People with ASPD frequently engage in criminal behavior. They also frequently engage in substance use. That's often a comorbid, makes everything worse. So one of the most common misconceptions about ASPD or psychopaths/sociopaths that grinds my gears endlessly is the assumption that they do not experience any emotion, that there's just nothing there. No. They have trouble with understanding empathy, or they just don't care to try to understand empathy. It's just not inherently there for them. And they don't want to understand the impact of what they do to others and how it can influence them because it's about their needs. And they actually tend to feel very strong emotions. They're just mostly anger and low frustration tolerance. So ASPD in and of itself alone does not present with hallucinations. That's important for Mr. Bateman. But individuals with ASPD who have substance use disorder may experience psychotic symptoms as a result of their substance use. So as we move through this story, you can see how maybe there's a brief psychotic disorder, maybe there's some substance-induced psychosis that may be playing into these personality disorders to create Patrick Bateman. So I'm going to go through these criteria for ASPD. Failure to conform to social norms concerning lawful behaviors, such as performing grounds that are for arrest, deceitfulness, repeated lying, use of aliases, or conning others for pleasure or personal profit. He does that. Impulsivity or failure to plan ahead. There's some of that. He is meticulous though. So this could be the intersection of some of the other disorders he has going on, kind of like meshing with the ASPD, which makes him extra dangerous. Irritability and aggressiveness. We see some of that. Reckless disregard for the safety of self or others. Consistent irresponsibility. Failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor monetary obligations. Patrick's rich, so I don't think that this one applies in the same way. He doesn't have consistent work behavior because he's usually hungover, feeling like crap when he goes to work the next day or misses work and has his secretary cover for him. Lack of remorse. So there's an indifference or there's some rationalization to having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from another person. That one's high for Patrick. Yeah, Patrick checks a lot of those boxes. The other disorder that I think is intermingling with this one, and when I say intermingling, there could be a full diagnostic criteria for the disorder. There could also just be a combination of these traits that don't meet the threshold for diagnosis. I think that Patrick could probably meet the threshold for both ASPD and MPD. That's just me. So MPD stands for narcissistic personality disorder. This requires a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, lack of empathy, beginning by early adulthood and present in various contexts. So a grandiose sense of self-importance. They may exaggerate achievements and talents, expecting to be recognized as superior without achievements. Preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Patrick thinks his shit don't stink. Belief in being special or unique. Need for excessive admiration. I mean, he keeps himself a particular way because of his preoccupation with appearance and making sure that he appears young and attractive. Sense of entitlement. That one's there. Exploitative of others, taking advantage of others to achieve their own needs. Yep, that one kind of crosses with ASPD as well, though. Lack of empathy also crosses with ASPD. Unwilling or unable to recognize or identify with the feelings or needs of others. Envy of others or belief that others are envious of him. You know, business cards. Arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. May display condescending or dismissive behavior. That is definitely Patrick. In both stories, very arrogant. Fun fact, Patrick Bateman is obsessed with Trump. It's mentioned in the movie briefly, like they think they see him somewhere. But in the book, it's a thing. Like, that's his person. Someone with NPD identifying and idolizing Donald Trump. Imagine that. So one big difference between the book and the movie is the depiction of Patrick's suspected tendency to hallucinate, or the movie touches on it, with him returning to the apartment of the individual he believed he killed and where he left dead bodies of women he had murdered. But when he gets there, there's no evidence that this has happened. Or when he's running from the police after killing a few people and hiding in his office and calling another individual to leave them a voicemail admitting his crimes. But Patrick didn't get caught. There was no indication that there was a manhunt. Side note about this conversation here. In the movie, he says multiple things that he didn't say in the book, in the voicemail. But the interesting part is that what he says in the movie, in the voicemail, reflects on some of the acts that take place in the book that they don't depict in the movie. I hope that made sense. In both, he has an ending where his reality or his perception of reality is shook. So in the book, of course, it was more described in detail, but they did a good job nailing it in the movie. He learns Paul Owen isn't really dead and is super confused because he remembers killing him and detailed it. It ends with him chilling with the boys, super confused, very disoriented. But the book details the intensity of these disorganized thought patterns much better than the movie. Sake of time. So now we're going to look at one of the things that there's a little bit of in the movie, but there's a lot of bit of in the book. And that could be the potential for a psychotic disorder. So psychotic disorders include any kind of disorder. There may be some hallucinations, disorganized speech. There may be a variety of symptoms, including catatonic behavior. We call those negative symptoms, whereas the positive symptoms are the ones where you're doing a thing. You're hallucinating. You are actively hearing voices that aren't there. So one of these disorders is schizophrenia. There's multiple disorders that have some of these criteria. I don't know that Patrick meets the full criteria for schizophrenia, but he's pretty close. And he definitely falls into some sort of psychotic disorder range. He's high functioning. He's doing pretty well, but we see a degradation of that over time. So in an active phase symptoms for schizophrenia, there's going to be delusions. So false beliefs that are not based in reality, such as paranoia or believing one has special powers. Hallucinations, experiencing sensory perceptions that are not real, like hearing voices or seeing things that aren't there. Disorganized speech. This one is much more significant in the book than in the movie. So it's difficulty organizing thoughts and speaking in a way that is coherent and logical. So the grossly disorganized or catatonic behaviors, so unusual movements, strange postures, or lack of movement. I don't know that we see this one a whole lot, but Patrick does act real weird in multiple areas. There's some other specific details that really nail this down, but that's a small overview. So in the book, intermittently, there are chapters where there are disorganized speech, and it's clear that he's struggling. I mean, there was multiple times where I was driving in my car, listening to him ramble on, and would pause and think, am I having a stroke? I am not understanding this. What? And it's almost like your brain is struggling to try to make sense of what is being said. It was giving me the same feeling that I've had when I have interacted with individuals with psychosis who are engaged in disorganized speech. It's quite unsettling. One thing to note is the further you get into the story, the more confusing everything gets. It switches back and forth between presenting evidence that all of these horrible things that Patrick has done did happen, also contradicting that. It's never truly confirmed. So it appears to be a linear story with huge gaps between events. Like each chapter is a different piece that can kind of stand on its own, but still contributes to the overall story. I think that was on purpose to demonstrate some of the instability and chaos in Patrick's mind. So one thing that's important when assessing individuals is their functioning level. You always want to consider how those symptoms are impacting their functioning with daily normal things, including work, relationships, and ability to participate reasonably in society. Patrick's ability to function in society varies. He seems successful on Wall Street, but we don't hear a lot about his work. We do learn he's probably one of those people that got a solid leg up because of mommy and daddy, and probably just has to fuck off most days at work to make ends meet. Patrick's functioning seems to decline as the story progresses. But it also ebbs and flows throughout that. So sometimes it's like he's good, other times it's like, oh damn, somebody's gonna notice something's off. And then it switches back. And as I said, there are brief chapters that he is just like inactive psychosis. And the only exception for that is if there was something supernatural afoot, which is never hinted at in this story. So my highly informal assessment of the entirely fictional character, Patrick Bateman, I've broken it into two sections. One where he is a murderer, and one where maybe he's not a murderer. So if Patrick is a murderer, I'm going to say there is ASPD present, there's MPD present. I still think there's autism present on top of all of that. And then possibly a brief psychotic disorder, maybe a substance-induced psychotic disorder, or the beginnings of schizophrenia or some other psychotic disorder. If he's not a murderer, there is definitely a psychotic disorder here. He has created a whole new reality with his hallucinations and fantasies. But even if he's not a murderer, I still think that there are some traits from these personality disorders that are present. Remember, personality disorders, especially cluster B ones, don't mean that someone is a murderer. This is separate. Patrick is a murderer because he sucks, and he just happens to have some mental health disorders that probably don't help and make it easier for him to engage in that behavior. But that's not a universal experience. And ultimately, we never learn what happens. Is he a serial killer? Or is he purely very mentally unwell and is lost in fantasy? I don't know. And guess what? The author doesn't know either. So here we are, leaving things open to interpretation. One thing is for sure though, he is not mentally well. Even in the book, it briefly describes the emotional pain that he is experiencing with his existence. And he shares that this is a key reason why he either wants to engage in these behaviors or does engage in these behaviors, because he wants to make others feel the pain that he experiences. It's misplaced retribution taken out on easily vulnerable victims, primarily women, gay men, and homeless people. So I listened to a brief interview with the author at the end of the book, and I found it interesting and a little troubling that he stated that of all of his characters of all of his books, he related the most with Patrick Bateman. Damn, dude. I hope you've done some therapy. So in conclusion, if you still like Patrick Bateman, read a synopsis of the book or read the book. Listen to the detailed experiences and the horrible things that he says and does. And then if you still like Patrick Bateman, maybe get some help. Regardless, very interesting story. Definitely worth a read for me. Still love the movie. I just don't love the character.